Greetings and welcome to another episode of Unpacking Islamophobia, a podcast project brought to you by The.Bridge.Initiative at Georgetown University. My name is Arsalan Iftikhar and I am your host. And today we will be speaking about the plight of the Chinese Uyghur Muslims with prominent lawyer and activist Nury Turkel. Nury currently serves as chairperson for the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, USCIRF, after being appointed there by House Speaker Nancy Pelosi in 2020. That same year, Nury was named to Time magazine's list of 100 most influential people in the world. And in 2021, he was also named one of Fortune 50's greatest leaders in the world. Nury Turkel's memoir, published in 2022, is called No Escape: The True Story of China's Genocide of the Uyghurs. And Nury Turkel is joining me today. Thank you so much, Nury. It is always good to see your face, my friend.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for not only having me on, but keeping the spotlight on the Uyghur genocide.
Well, I want to start with the title of your book. Your 2022 memoir is called No Escape. And I wanted you to tell our audience a little bit about why you chose that story and a little bit about your own origin story.
I get this question often because no escape, and I'm here. What are you escaping from? This as history that I was born in a Chinese re-education camp during the height of the Cultural Revolution. And those camps are very similar camps that the modern world learn about in communist China, that was specifically built to collectively punish Uyghur Muslims in this atheist communist country. So I feel that I managed to escape the Chinese persecution after surviving the camp, after getting my education in communist educational system, up until the point of graduating from college. And I was feeling great. I was granted asylum, become a naturalized U.S. citizen, lawyer in nation's capital, and serving in the U.S. Government in this important government agency. And then I realized when I was about to write this book that, no, wait, I'm not fully escaped the Chinese persecution. And I can't see my mother and my father. The last time I saw my mother was in 2004 when she and my late father came to Washington. My father passed away last year. And I haven't seen my mother for 19 years. And the Chinese government sanctioned me in December 2021 in retaliation against the Biden administration's policies, including diplomatic boycott of the Genocide Olympics in Beijing last February. And then even after my father passed away last year, the Chinese won't let my mom to return to the United States to her American family. So, and this harassment, this intimidation, even in my personal professional life, American citizen and US official, made me feel that I have not been able to escape this brutal regime. And similarly, through this book, with this title, I also wanted to make general public in the free societies like ours no longer feel that they can escape this brutal reality that China set up some of the most sophisticated surveillance systems, surveilling their own ethno-religious groups, the Uyghur Muslims in this case. And not only that, they are exporting the model, surveillance model, the governance model to other countries. As we speak, there are over 80 countries adopted the Chinese surveillance technology. And also domestically speaking, everything that we touch, consumer products, PPE, solar panels, everything reportedly been made with Uyghur slave labor. So I have not been able to escape the Chinese persecution. And I also wanted to make American people, especially people who cares about the future of our country, that they no longer say that they are in a position to escape this brutal reality and this brutal regime and this challenge coming our way.
So, Nury, I wanted to ask you about a little more context. According to the Chinese government, the current crisis that we see today around Uyghur Muslims, ostensibly for them, began around July 2009 during social unrest in Urumqi, which is the capital of the Xinjiang province. And, because a lot of folks might not have background in terms of who the Uyghur Muslims are, where they come from, and how they impact the rest of the world, I was wondering if you could give us some background on the 2009 social unrest and why it was significant to where we are today.
Yeah, before the world come to know about the Uyghur plight, the Uyghur genocide, the easiest way that I find useful to describe who the Uyghurs are as follows. The Uyghurs are the other Tibetans that you have never heard of in the past. But those days are gone. And I can't believe that I'm saying this, but I thought it was horrible then. But I would go back to that period in a heartbeat. I'm talking about 1990s, early 1990s, and in the 1980s, even in late part of before the 9/11 era, that the entire Muslim population around the world turned into a suspicious class. So that's how I initially, and still to this day, use to describe, or the way to describe who the Uyghurs are. But the Uyghurs are Turkic Muslims. Have been living in the parts of China that are known as East Turkestan to the Uyghur people. The Uyghur people call it Sharqi Turkestan. That's kind of a half Arabic, half Turkish name. The Uyghurs practice Sunni Islam starting from 12th, 13th century. Prior to that, based on the history books, the Uyghurs practiced Buddhism, shamanism, and Christianity. So Uyghurs are one of the oldest, one of the Muslim population in the world have practiced Islam for centuries. The Uyghurs' homeland makes 1/6 of the China proper, officially known as Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region. So it's not like the provinces. Province is a very different story. Like Tibet, like Inner Mongolia, there are 5 autonomous regions that Uyghur homeland is one of them. So when the communists took over with the help of Stalin in 1949, they changed the name from East Turkestan to Xinjiang, which means new dominion, new frontier, essentially new colony. From that point all the way to 2009, the Uyghurs have experienced various forms of discrimination, exploitation of their natural resources, birth control, imposition of Chinese medium in the education system, prohibiting Uyghur women, children practicing Islam, displaying signs at the entrance of mosques saying things like teachers, women, children under the age of 12 cannot enter this mosque to practice, otherwise will be subject to discipline, if not a criminal punishment. So that kind of pressure cooker situation erupted in 2009. And this also relates to something that is happening today, forced labor. In a American company in the southern province of Guangdong, the Uyghur workers who were enslaved there, beaten up and killed by local Chinese mob. And then the Uyghurs in the homeland in Urumqi took to the streets to demand justice. That essentially created the mindset for the Chinese policymakers and leadership that these people need to be forcibly changed. We need to engage in some sort of social engineering program to make them less Muslim, make them less Uyghur, so that they will be identified as Chinese. Calling Uyghurs as Chinese is very, very offensive term. So it's unstated goal of the Chinese state to turn Uyghurs into a Han Chinese by describing it something like a normal human being. Former Chinese ambassador to Washington told CNN Farid Zakaria that his government is helping Uyghurs to transform into normal human being. To the Chinese government, not being Muslim, not being Uyghur, following their tradition, adopting their language, way of life, marrying their people is a normalization process. But to me and many others, that is a human reengineering. Today, the Chinese operates the world's largest concentration camp that the world has not seen since the Holocaust era. During the height of the Holocaust, the largest number of Jews, Roma, and others detained in the concentration camps were 750,000 because they were killing and bringing new ones. But in China, based on US government's estimate, anywhere between 2 to 3 million Uyghurs have been locked up in a industrial scale concentration camps. And also, in addition to that, about 800,000 to 1 million Uyghur children, as reported in the New York Times, being sent to the children's camps. This essentially makes the Chinese committing genocide against Uyghur children as well. On top of that, 83 global brands reportedly using Uyghur slave labor. So some of the detainees were initially sent to the concentration camps, now sent to forced labor camps, making sneakers, solar panels, components, computer components, PPEs, beauty products. And then finally, Uyghur intellectuals been rounded up, social elites been rounded up, religious leaders been rounded up and sent to concentration camps. I know for a fact that several of my Uyghur American friends who have family members who used to be state employees, even their years of employment with the state did not secure or guaranteed or spare them from the concentration camps. So the 2009 was the turning point that the Chinese had given up stick and carrot policy, and that helped with Xi Jinping coming to power in 2012, which essentially says, okay, we got to do something to completely control lives and souls, properties and land of these people, so that we will have a better, more secured future in our plan to realize this China dream through Belt and Road Initiative.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about the Belt and Road Initiative in just a minute, but I want to talk a little bit more about the internment camps. As you mentioned, you know, there was a seminal 2018 human rights report which found that over 1 million Muslim Uyghurs were forced to renounce Islam, criticize basic Muslim practices, forced to drink alcohol and eat pork, both which are forbidden for observant Muslims, and even recite communist propaganda songs. I want you to, Nury, tell us a little bit more about what we know about these concentration camps and the scale and magnitude.
Yeah. The camps, you know, during the process of writing my book, I studied the history of concentration camps by relying on this concentration camp historian, Andrea Pritzker's book called One Long Night. I was disturbed when I look at the historical nature and the modern day concentration camps, specifically on their commonalities, such as collective punishment based on ethno-religious background, extrajudicial nature, and also not knowing why a detainee been locked up. You know, when you interview the camp survivors, the first thing they will tell you is like, I don't know why they took me in there. I still don't know why they took me in there. So these are the kind of commonalities that the Uyghur camps share with the historical camps. But why the question becomes, what is the Chinese government's problem with the Uyghur people? The Uyghur people's problem, perceived problem by the Chinese, is being Uyghur Muslim. So the Chinese Communist Party always in the past treated Uyghur religious demand for religious freedom or desire for religious freedom some sort of rallying cry or slogan. But for the Uyghur people, it's a matter of death and life and death, because, you know, the Uyghur value, Uyghur family, Uyghur society, Uyghur architecture, Uyghur arts, even Uyghur music coming from the Sufi background, all boils down to Islamic value. The Uyghurs have been very, very if you ask anyone what is the Uyghur value, they will describe a list of values or things that are part of the Uyghur value. We'd be surprised. This is very common in Islamic culture. So the Uyghur being, Uyghur identity, Uyghur way of life, by and large, use Islamic teaching as a source. So the Chinese believe that such a belief and such a way of living a dignified life goes on the face of the Chinese communist ideology. So the Chinese, as reported, this is not a news to anyone who reads about the Chinese. The Chinese regime, specifically the Communist Party, has been extremely hostile to religious practices, specifically a Western religion. So Western religion includes Christianity and Islam. The Buddhism and other religion is considered domestic religion or non-foreign religion. So to the Chinese, when you listen to it, religion presents an enormous threat because of the potential to undermine the regimes hold on power. And China's officials, and this has been part of the leaked documents, have likened the belief in Islam in particular to a mental illness and thought virus. So this mental illness, thought virus, based on their perception, based on their determination, need to be cleaned out before it spreads to the entire population. And why this Western religion is a problem, that also has something to do with the Uyghurs' connection to the outside world, specifically Islamic world.
Sure.
When it comes to the Christian community, they link the Western religion to the Bill of Rights, essentially, religious belief, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, and assembly. So they focus on those four things as a threat. As you know, that all the Abrahamic religion share so much in common, and Chinese have figured this out long time ago. So when you look at the way that they talk about Islam, the way they talk about even Catholics in China, you'll be surprised how early that they made up their mind that foreign religion is a threat. But they don't say it. They always said, oh, we're trying to root out terrorism. What kind of terrorism that they're talking about? They also often say separatism, extremism. If you decide to grow a beard, or if you decided to educate your children, or instill value in your children on things as simple as marrying a Muslim man or woman, can be perceived as a sign of extremism. In April 2017, they published legislated something called de-extremification measure, sanctioning 48 behaviors that includes growing beard, abstaining from alcohol or other human contact, and also discouraging or interfering children's love affair with non-Uyghur, non-Muslim individuals, praying 5 times a day, or keeping religious text, at least as things as simple as prayer mat. The Chinese online retailer reportedly forced by the Chinese state to disclose purchase history of individuals who bought a beard, breed, and the prayer mat and religious materials. A Silicon Valley-based company called Zappia was promoting this app for religious text sharing, and they use that app traces or data, transactional history or sharing history, to round up people. So this regime is inherently anti-Islam. But here's the irony. In the face of this reality, in the backdrop of the Chinese hostility to Islam in particular, in today's strange world, the biggest supporters of communist China comes from Muslim countries. Let that sink in. It
Oh,
is disturbing.
it is.
Two ways. One, some countries, I don't hesitate to name Saudi Arabia, for example, could be instrumental in changing Chinese behavior. This is not an exaggeration.
Agreed.
MBS's influence over the thinking of Chinese, or the Erdogan's influence in the mindset of the
So
Chinese,
that's actually that is my next question, Nury.
cannot be understated.
No, and that's my next question, right? And it's going back, it's tying it all together in terms of the silence of the world, particularly the Muslim world. And to me, it starts, as you mentioned, with the Belt and Road Initiative. And for those people who don't know, the Belt and Road Initiative is a staggering $1 trillion infrastructure project, which ostensibly is going to connect to China all the way to Africa. And basically what China has done is they have walked along that path with their $1 trillion of money, and essentially bought off the silence of many Muslim majority world leaders. I remember a couple of years ago that then Prime Minister of Pakistan, Imran Khan, was being interviewed by a Turkish network, and he was asked, so are you not allowed to criticize the Chinese because of all the money that you're getting in terms of the $63 billion in the CPEC corridor, the China-Pakistan economic corridor, which is going to build the port city of Gwadar? And on camera, Imran Khan said, to tell you the truth, I don't even really know what's going on there, even though Xinjiang actually shares a border with the country of Pakistan. You also mentioned Turkey. Recep Tayyip Erdogan, who is a self-styled populist claiming to stand up for Muslims worldwide, once actually said that the Uyghurs are living there happily when asked about internment camps, even though his own foreign ministry had refuted him just a couple of months earlier. And MBS, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, who I hasten to add, the CIA found was responsible for the murder of Washington Post columnist Jamal Khashoggi, also said that China is allowed to carry de-extremism campaigns like the ones they have against the Uyghurs. And so my question to you, Nury, is this purchased silence of Muslim world leaders is obviously astonishing to anybody, but can you tell us a little bit more about the Belt and Road Initiative and the impact that the Chinese money is having on the way that the Muslim world leaders perceive the situation of the Uyghurs today?
The one of the China's unstated goal, as I alluded earlier, involves China's geostrategic interest, geopolitical interest in Central Asia, by way of getting, reaching to African and natural resources, and also European, Eastern, Central European market. Now we have another new angle. In the past, in the early parts of BRI, the international community were focused on places like ports, but now we have something new, which is Chinese technology. The Belt and Road Initiative, BRI as known, is a Xi Jinping signature project. So this is a kind of a soft power projection of a soft power, projecting soft power to expand China's influence. There's a scholar who's currently serving in the Biden White House, wrote a book called Long Game. In that book, it essentially explains the Chinese ambition. Two words: one, blunt, and build. While blunting the U.S. influence around the world through projects like this, they are building their own through international organizations. It's kind of a parallel undertaking. One hand, they're showering money to countries in the Middle East, in Central Asia, in Southeast Asia, Africa, essentially saying, look, America is not your friend. There's using some historical mistakes that the United States made, in such as the Iraqi war, and now the Afghanistan debacle, and the U.S. history in some parts of Africa. They use that to make their own product, which is the projects, infrastructure projects, loans, to buy out silence, expand their influence. So they currently, as of 2020, this as of last month, there are 151 countries still listed as part of the BRI project. Wow. Some countries are showing buyer's remorse. The maturity of the Chinese investment will be coming up. The loan payment will start, and most of those countries, particularly in the global south, will not be able to make payments. And then what will happen is that this will create huge resentment in a domestic front. And at the same time, Chinese will come and say, look, you cannot pay it, but I have to own it now. Just like the way that what happened in Sri Lanka. So this thing is really, you know, with the Putin's reinvasion of Iraq, some domestic problems here in the United States and Europe, kind of distracted policymakers from focusing on this. There was some active, very healthy discussion a few years ago. Not much going on, but Chinese has not, the Chinese government or those who are proponent of this global ambition in Xi Jinping's China, for Xi Jinping's China, haven't really given up on this project yet. This is something to me, the most important thing is the infrastructure aspect of this project. So what is happening now is the Chinese installing cell towers, installing submarine telecommunication cables. So these are very expensive. It's not easy to replace. Once you install them, once you let them install, you're locked in. So once you're locked in, you become permanently dependent. I mean, why even in the United States, there's some rural areas still inclining to use 5G network provided by Huawei because it's a cheaper alternative. In the societies like ours, the companies, big telecommunication companies, don't invest in a way that they should to prevent us being in a situation to rely on technology by unfriendly regimes like China. In other countries, it's the same problem. The government simply don't have the resources to fund those infrastructure projects. Once they installed, once they provide technology, comes with financial incentives, a political economic aspect. The more importantly, once they put those equipment in or install them, the Chinese will have a permanent access to the data. Once you have the data, they can control the rest of the process. So China is rightfully been described as a new Saudi Arabia when it comes to personal data. So the danger of another thing, I will stop after this mentioning the Chinese tech giant Huawei publicly brags about 140 the cloud storage contract that they're able to sign on with 140 countries. At the United Nations, we have about 190. And you can just appreciate how successful that the Chinese BRI project in various spheres have been. So, it looks innocuous, harmless, but in the long term, a lot of countries that are signed on, including some European countries, will have a very serious regret, a buyer's remorse, in simple terms.
My final question to you, Nury, is what do you hope happens in the future? We had in 2019 the Uyghur Human Rights Policy Act that was passed in Congress. We had a former Secretary of State refer to what's happening as a genocide, but we also still had a 2022 Winter Olympics in Beijing. while 1 million people plus were in internment camps and nobody said a word. And so, as one of the most prominent Uyghur Muslim public intellectuals in the West, what do you hope, how can we get these people out of the camps? How do we bring China to account for what's going on to over 1 million people simply because of their religious identity?
So this is, you read my mind. This is something keeps me awake at night. For two reasons. One, Arsalan, I think you would agree, if any country around the world locks up not 3 million, several 100,000 Muslim population in a concentration camp, you can anticipate reasonably resolution after resolution at the UN.
Absolutely.
Screaming, yelling from the rooftop, name calling, shaming, naming campaigns, and street protests in the Muslim countries, but none of them have happened.
Yeah.
Because China happened to be an inconvenient adversary to take on. The Uyghurs are also happen to be a type of people lending support would cost dearly. Ask basketball player Enes Kanter for speaking out. Former Arsenal soccer player Mesut Özil, the German,
Sure,
who posted on his Instagram account criticizing China for the atrocities. He was benched, ended up leaving Premier League. To this day, there's no single documentary, let alone movie, being made by Hollywood. There's no single Silicon Valley executive. Actually, there's one of them mocking. It's like, who cares about the Uyghurs? If you remember, there was a guy by the name Shamas something, I forgot his last name, an immigrant from Sri Lanka to Canada, a child of an immigrant, mocking the Uyghurs, like essentially saying, so there's a, I feel very comfortable. I don't think that I need to bite my tongue to say this. If the Uyghurs happen to be a different type of Muslims, we may have seen a different type of response from Europe in particular. If the China is a different type of adversary, we will have seen a very different type of responses from the Muslim streets. So, it is very distressful situation, to be frank. When I look at the world's reaction to Putin's crimes in Ukraine, I was heartwarmed. I was encouraged. In fact, it compelled me even myself to be a voice for Ukrainian people. Maybe because of my work supporting the Ukrainian people, Ukrainian democracy and sovereignty, I got punished. I get sanctioned by Putin. So it's all worth it. But at the same time, why don't we see a similar type of reaction from the business community? As you may recall, in the early parts of the reinvasion, in less than 2 weeks, the global business community either just shut it down, pull it out, or suspended their business practices. Even to this day, after this genocide being in its 6th year, there's no single global brand that publicly calls out China. There are few of them relocated their sourcing base, but still, so these kind of things really bothers me. And then the other thing, in the moral ground, we always hear politicians saying that we should not let Putin to normalize these kind of war crimes, bombing civilian buildings, taking children to the camps. Putin is also following Xi Jinping's model. It's very disturbing, focusing on Ukrainian children. Focusing means taking them away, sending them to the camps. So international community, including myself, yourself, are reasonably morally supportive of the Ukrainian cause, and we've been chanting that we should not. Same type of logic could and should apply to Xi Jinping.
Sure.
For me, Putin is a kind of a storm. Once it's gone, we may have a different type of relationship with the Russian Federation. And I can't say the same about China. The CCP has a plan for the world. They incorporated everything into the national security strategy. even religious persecution, because it creates resentment against the government. It becomes a source for rallying against the Chinese communist state. So they made up their mind. So what should be done? I think one very simple thing, the policymakers around the world need to grow a backbone. And then two, the policymakers and heads of state, government officials need to be reminded that the history will not be kind to them because they're looking the other way. In the face of this danger about our future, you know, the Uyghur, the damage that this genocide, this regime caused to the Uyghurs are irreparable.
Yeah.
Hundreds of thousands of families been broken. We talked about just bare minimum 800,000 children. This was one of the reasons that former Secretary of State Pompeo feel compelled to call this a genocide. On the same day, Tony Blinken acknowledged that it would be his judgment when he was pressed by a senator in a confirmation hearing. So that in of itself shows that this is a very serious problem, but the lack of political will, focusing too much on the business interest, money, focusing too much on, you know, using China against or for their economic interest vis-a-vis United States and Europe. Some countries do that, using China to get attention from the others for geopolitical reason. So the Uyghurs become a very useful football in some countries dealing with the Chinese. But at the same time, Arsalan, I'm very grateful for our country for the bold steps have taken. You know, somebody living, working in the human rights space for more than 2 decades, I never thought that the Uyghur community would be able to pass 2 pieces of important legislation without any monetary investment. In Washington, lobbying a bill requires lots of resources.
Lots.
There's no PR firm. There's no lobbying firm. There's no even organized movement. The Uyghur people deserve a lot of credit being able to do this in the U.S. Capitol. Now we have a bipartisan consensus, you know, moving to the positive side. I'm appointed by Nancy Pelosi. A few days ago, I attended the State of Union at the invitation of Republican leadership.
Nice.
I had a chance to meet and greet with Speaker McCarthy. So this is a bipartisan. You know, what part of religious freedom, human rights ever even connects to a party politics? This is my mission. When I'm talking about religious freedom, when I'm talking about human rights, when I'm talking about freedom in general, I don't let people bring in their political views. You know, we all have opinion, but this is a freedom. This is, as I noted early on, life and death situation. You know, I in my early parts of my professional life, I was asked about my political view, and I said, look, when somebody walks into my office, I don't ask what political party that this person belongs to. So it doesn't matter. I'm here to provide legal service. So that's what I believe. And one thing that I really would like to see is that putting all the frustration on the side, you know, feel great about all the accomplishments we made. I would like to see somebody put out a plan, say, this is my strategy. This is why I believe this is important to stop this genocide so that we can prevent another one. And this is also public. You know, I've been very open in my view. I worry about the Muslims in India. I worry about the Christian community in Nigeria. So if you don't make it costly for the bad actors, if you don't impose costs on the regime or entities and individuals who are comfortable going out chasing and collectively punishing ethno-religious groups, then this will become a new normal. The normalcy provides exception and exception, both. That is a very dangerous trend line. That's where we are today.
Nury Turkel is an Uyghur Muslim lawyer who currently serves as chair of the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom. He was named Time Magazine's 100 most influential people in the world in 2020, and in 2021 was also named to Fortune Magazine's 50 greatest leaders. His latest memoir is called No Escape: The True Story of China's Genocide of the Uyghurs. And Nury, it has been an honor to have you on our podcast today.
Thank you so much, Arslan, for having me on.